Hello, Fish Faithful. This is Marlins Daily on the Fan Arch Network. I am Kurt Semder. And the Marlins wrap up the series in Atlanta with a game to forget, to say the least. An 11-3 drubbing by the Braves in a game that, had a over an hour rain delay very early on in the game that kind of broke up the momentum, broke things up a bit. This really was, a tale of two games, and neither tale was good for the Marlins. So, you look at the first half of this game, and you look at the second half of this game, and the story is the offense wasn't there and the pitching wasn't great. But even before the game started, it was an interesting lineup choice by Clayton McCullough, wasn't it? I saw the lineup coming out a little bit before the game, took a quick look at what was going on there, and I had a couple of questions taking a look at what Clayton was sending out there for this game. And from what I saw online, a lot of you did as well. Seemed like he was giving a lot of players a day off, seemed like he was putting some players into the lineup together that hadn't been there or hadn't played together recently, both defensively and offensively there. And it didn't really work out. I was trying to figure out what was going on here. Maybe there was something, behind it with the stats. Maybe there was something that I wasn't seeing. I took a little look here again. Martin Perez was taking the mound, so you got another lefty on the mound. So, you take out some of your lefty bats that, have struggled in these situations, whether we just taking a look at the numbers, Jacob Marcy batting 160 against lefties, Joe Mack 175 against lefties, Owen Casey 233, Jeff Griffin Conine batting 182. So these guys have struggled against lefties all season, as well as most of the team. So, you put Leo Jimenez into the lineup. Hasn't done much better, but you're looking to give some guys a little bit of a break. Estuary Ruiz, he's hitting 262. Agustin Ramirez getting the start at DH. He's hitting over 300 and limited experience against lefties this season at the major league level. The placement of guys in the lineup was confusing to me a little bit. Ramirez hitting third seemed a little bit high to me. Jimenez hitting fifth also seemed a little bit high to me. And, you don't have Mack in there. You could have had Ramirez catch, but giving him a day off here and playing Brian Avaretto. So your lineup is definitely a little bit weaker than it had been in the past. And we talked about some of the offensive woes that this team had. So I was willing to give it a shot. Maybe this would be the situation where you give some guys a day off, you get some new guys into the lineup, maybe you can get a spark, catch lightning in a bottle. What ended up happening was for the first three innings, the Marlins didn't get a hit. Not one. They struggled against Martin Perez right through the first round through the lineup. And at least up until that point, Jansen Junk was, keeping things under control. You hadn't fallen behind yet. And then in the third inning, Ronald Acuna Jr. blasts one to left center that Ruiz had in his glove, but he and Herberto Hernandez collide with one another, and the ball pops out of his glove and goes over the fence. And the slow motion replay of the two of them kind of looking at each other, looking around to see where the ball was, and then suddenly realizing it went over the fence is just a picture-perfect representation of this game, because the Marlins just let this game get away from them, and before they knew it, it was over. And then you had a rain delay take place, so Perez got out of the game, so Clayton started messing around with the lineup again a little bit more. But Jansen Junk was also out of the game, so you had to go bring in the bullpen, and the bullpen struggled. The bullpen struggled in this one. They gave up 9 runs the rest of the way. The defense didn't really get it done. They committed 3 errors, including one by Xavier Edwards that extended a 4-run 6th inning for the Braves. And the team just, they said it on the broadcast, and I couldn't agree with it more. They came out flat after the rain delay. And they were able to put together a couple of runs late, but the game was really over by that point. And an 11-3 loss results in a sweep by the Braves, and you end up with a 3-4 road trip winning 3 of 4 against the Mets and then getting swept by the Braves. You're taking on the two teams at opposite ends of the division there. 3-4 against with the Braves in there might not necessarily be terrible, but since you started 3-1, you would have liked to at least finish 4-3. Would have been nice to at least get one of these games, but it wasn't meant to be. And again, the offense, they got a lot of their hits late in this one, but the struggles against lefties continues to be an issue, and it really is something that could hamper any kind of serious playoff push for this team, depending on the matchups, because they don't have a lot of answers. You know, if the lineup here was put together to try to get some righty bats in there and to get some guys in there that can kind of give you a spark against a left-handed pitcher, like I said, the options weren't great. And I don't know where the help is coming from at this point post-trade deadline. So Marlins just going to have to hope they face a lot of righties and that a lot of teams that they play in big spots don't have a lefty to put in there against them. Because otherwise, you know, big-time bats that they need to produce, guys like Griffin Conine, guys like Owen Casey, guys like Domac, they might get neutralized. Kyle Stowers, these are the kind of guys who might get neutralized by a big lefty. And we've seen it already happen on more than one occasion. So not the best night, not the best event for them here in this one. Again, 11-3 loss that the Marlins are just going to have to put this whole series behind them and move on and try to pick things up when they return home. Taking a quick look here at the standings here as we wrap up this week. The Marlins were 1.5 games out of the wild card at the start of the week when the trade deadline took place. They're now 3.5 games back behind Arizona for the last spot. And, you know, considering the week they had here with the Braves, falling 2 more games back, could have been, I guess, a little bit worse, but falling 2 games back is not ideal. And like I said, some of these other teams are starting to really pick up steam. The Cubs played really well this week, you know, swept the Dodgers. Phillies are right where they expect to be. They're kind of leveling out. Padres are playing well. Diamondbacks and Padres had a series this week as well. So, you know, you have the teams starting to play each other, so it kind of evens out. But, you know, you're going into the weekend now. You're 3.5 games back of the wild card. You don't want to fall too far back of that final wild card playoff spot. So, Marlins sitting back at 500. They need to turn this around quickly. You know, you could take 3 losses here against the Braves. You don't really like it, but you can take it as long as you play well this weekend and play well moving forward. So, not ideal. Not ideal. And hopefully the pitching can get a little bit better. Hopefully the bullpen can just forget this game. You know, anytime you have Javier Sanoa have to come into the game and pitch, you know the night did not go your way. And this night definitely did not go their way. You know, we talked earlier this week about the trade deadline and what took place at the deadline. And I said I was going to take a closer look at some of the trade deadline acquisitions that got made and some of these prospects, you know, the Marlins acquired. You know, you acquire prospects, you never know how these guys are going to turn out until they, you know, reach the major league level and start playing for you. But, you know, we can take a look and kind of gauge where these guys may fall, or at least where some of them may fall within the organization going forward. And, you know, taking a look at some of the players that were acquired, the Marlins, you know, we're talking about 8 players overall at the minor league level that were acquired in trades for, you know, that where Liam Hicks, Braxton Garrett, and Lake Bacher were traded away. And, you know, I took a look at some of the guys that were acquired and took a look at their rankings right now. You know, when we talk about MLB Pipeline rankings and they rank everybody and put them into, you know, where they rank within the team, position, and so forth. You know, the Marlins added 4 players to their top 30. That 4 players that landed in their top 30 at the deadline. That's pretty good. And 3 of those 4 were in the Liam Hicks trade alone. Now, you could say that's a testament to the Marlins system that they needed that kind of infusion, or you could just say they added some really good players. And I choose to go to the latter there, that they added some good players, because you take a closer look at what they've been able to achieve so far at the minor league level and what they could become. The Marlins could have something here, at least one of these guys, if not more, hopefully, that can contribute, if not this season, next season. So, you know, you look at the Liam Hicks trade, first of all, and you look at the guy who's ranked the highest in there from the prospects that they acquired, and that's Braden Taylor. Third baseman, second baseman, you know, plays the infield, just 24 years old. He's already at AAA in Jacksonville right now. You know, this season in AA, he hit 17 home runs, hit 284, 20 stolen bases. So you got your 20-20, possibly 30-30 type threat in the future, type of person right there. Again, another lefty. So, you know, you're looking at a guy who could profile as, you know, the type of guy we talked about before, a Stowers, a Casey, a Conine type of bat in your lineup. not that that's a bad thing because you don't know who's going to be on the team when someone like that arrives or makes their way up to the major league roster. But this is a player here who, you know, at just 24 years old has a lot of room to improve and could definitely help you out, especially on the infield and at third base, which is a spot that the Marlins are lacking, and they do not have a lot of depth, and they're going to need to upgrade that position at some point. So maybe Braden Taylor will be the answer. The other two prospects that they got in this trade for Liam Hicks landed at 23 and 24 respectively on their top 30. That's Jacob Kisting and Adrian Santana, the Florida native. Kisting's an interesting guy when you look at he's so young and he's just getting started at just 23 years old. The Marlins put him at Double-A already. His numbers at High A ball this year really, really good. They really do jump off the page at you with 6-0, an ERA under 2. 96 strikeouts in just 86 innings. So and very few walks. That's what I love to see, especially from a young pitcher. Very few walks. It means they've got good command of the strike zone. That's something that sometimes pitchers get called up to the big leagues and still are working on. So it seems like he's got some real good command of the strike zone, and he is able to avoid putting himself in bad situations by walking a lot of batters. He's still probably about 2, maybe even 3 years away, depending on how things break down. But the fact is they added another pitcher here to a system and a team that needs more pitching depth in their farm system. And when they traded away Braxton Garrett, and we'll talk about that in a bit, he kind of profiles into that area where he can kind of, in a couple of years or two, fill that void. Santana's an interesting player, a shortstop, just 21 years old, a lot of untapped potential there. He, again, is a couple of years away, and he also went to Double-A. But he hit over 300 so far this year at High A ball and stole 23 bases, not a lot of power, but has good contact, strikes out too much like most players do at this age. But again, type of player who profiles well with a high average, high stolen bases, and could potentially be a shortstop of the future for this team, depending on where they go with some of their other prospects in the system. But, a good you look at a trade, and again, we talked about the Liam Hicks trade and who the Marlins were able to get in this thing. They got 3 players for Hicks who rank in their top 30 right now from Tampa Bay. And yes, there are players that Peter Bendix was very familiar with his time with the Rays, but whatever, who cares? What does it matter? The fact is, Peter Bendix likes these guys. He thinks they're going to be good for the Marlins. And you know what? Right now they profile as filling needs that this team has. So let's see how they play out and they go out. The other prospect who ranked in the top 30 and ranked at number 14 is Jonathan Long, who the Marlins acquired from the Cubs when they traded away Braxton Garrett. And this was a trade, and Jonathan Long was a player that I think a lot of Marlins fans got excited about when they took a look at what he could do. And he may be here sooner rather than later. He's already at AAA, hitting 283, 12 homers, 62 RBI at AAA this year. Those are good numbers for a AAA ball player. Here's the big thing. That goes with what we've been talking about all show. He's a righty bat. And a righty bat who can give you a little bit of pop, who can hit for average, is kind of what this team's missing. Now, he plays first base, outfield. It's a Kyle Stowers type situation. Whether or not he could do some reps at third base, I'm not really sure. I have to take a closer look. First base, Bo, he could fill that void. He could fill that gap if you want that when you lose a guy like Hicks. And I think one of our viewers even mentioned that Long for Hicks could be the swap out as far as the roster is concerned, and it could be. But at 24 years old, and again, he could be here this season, and I think he probably will be, especially if the struggles against lefties continue. This team doesn't have a lot of options, as I said, for righty bats. So, we'll see what it goes. But again, I mentioned here, you add 4 prospects that you can get excited about, and you didn't lose too much. I don't think having Liam Hicks on the roster would have affected any of these games in Atlanta. I don't think having Lake Bacher on the team would have affected any of these games in Atlanta. And going forward, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on what happens the rest of the way either. So the Marlins did make these trades for the future. These guys are part of the team's future right now, whether it's on their team or perhaps being traded away if this team ever decides to trade prospects for major league players, which doesn't happen very often, let's be honest. But let's see how this all develops. But that's the prospect breakdown of kind of where they've got here and who they were able to pick up at the deadline. Not too shabby. Heading into the weekend, coming back home, got to get some wins. Got the Angels in town. You got a Ryan Gusto game in there, sure, but you got Sandy taking the mound. You know you've got a good chance for a win when he's on the hill. So hopefully they were not looking at an extended losing streak one way or another. And the Angels are a team that traded away a couple of their key players at the deadline. They're kind of looking forward to next season already. This is a series that you should at least get 2 out of 3 if you're a serious playoff team. And the Marlins, just like I said, gotta forget this week what the Braves happened, these series, these games. Just forget all about it and move on. Because after the Angels, the Pirates are coming in. And there's a team that you don't want to play poorly against. You don't want passing you in the standings. You don't want to have to play catch up when you're dealing in such a tough wild card race, and it's very tight right now. These are games you have to win. So big homestand coming up for the Marlins. 6 games at home, 3 with LA, 3 with the Pirates. And we'll see. I think the pitching lines up well for them. And if they can just figure out a way to get this offense clicking again, to kind of break out of this kind of slump that they're having right now. Otto Lopez has cooled off. He's still hitting well over 300 and still near the top of the league. But he's cooled off. Xavier Edwards is he was on base a lot in the game against the Braves. But again, he's had some issues as of late. And again, these guys just got to be more consistent at the plate, and they got to find a way to string together hits, because that's the only way this team scores runs, is by stringing together multiple hits in the same inning and pushing across 2-3 runs and hoping that the pitching can get it done. And if they can follow that blueprint, then hopefully they can get a couple of wins against the Angels this weekend. I'll catch up with everybody on Monday, as we'll see what happens against the Angels this weekend and look ahead to the series with the Pirates. We've got much more going on here on Marlins Daily. Thank you, everybody, for watching today and for watching this week. We've had a lot of great shows this week after the deadline, a lot of great interaction with you guys out there. Remember, like, subscribe, let me know what you think of the show. And like I said, I'll see everybody on Monday. Have a great weekend.